Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the center. I'll just give brief bios. Manjula Padmanabhan is an author, playwright, and cartoonist. Her play Harvest won the 1977 Onassis Award for Theatre. Her weekly comic strip, Sukiyaki, am I saying it right, appears in the Business Line in Chennai. Her two most recent novels, Escape and the Island of Lost Girls, are set in the brutal future world. She lives in the US with a home in New Delhi. Welcome to the center. And of course, Dr. Rishi Goyal is an assistant professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine in Medical Humanities and Ethics and the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society at Columbia University, where he is the director of Medicine, Literature and Society major track. He is also an adjunct associate professor of Humanities at the University of Southern Denmark. Again, we are so happy to have you here and welcome everyone to the center.
Should we head up? Okay. So while the setup suggests that we should be sitting apart from each other, Manjula decided that it would be friendlier if we sat together.
It's a conversation.
And I think she's right. So thank you. Thank you, Ravina. Thank you, Tulika. Thank you, Manoj, right? I got it. For making this day possible, for allowing us to be here, and for inviting all you good folk. It's a much larger turnout, I have to say, than I expected. And you're all here to see me, of course. I'm sure. I'm sure what helped is, the fact that we have Manjula here, which is an incredible opportunity for you all and for me. I've only gotten to know her initially through her work, but now, after a few conversations on email, on the phone, and just
the best of friends,
and sitting down with the best of friends, and it's a really, I think, great opportunity for all of us to think about what's happening. As Ravina mentioned, we're in the process of doing a 2-day conversation about something called medical humanities. You may ask, what is that? There's no humans in medicine. Oh, but wait a minute. There are, right? The whole point of medicine is that it's oriented towards humans, human bodies, people, care, emotion, the real lived experience. And often that's lacking in the way we practice medicine. So one of our goals is to think about how do we reinvigorate, how do we reintroduce those kinds of questions and concerns back into our practice of medicine on a daily basis. And where I teach, I think a lot about literature. I mean, there are different ways to do this, but I think about the ways in which literary texts can help us. One of my favorite authors, George Eliot, has a short phrase, and it's something like this. The greatest benefit we owe to the artist, whether painter, poet, or playwright, is the extension of our sympathies. We turn to art to allow us access to other minds, to other worlds. And in some ways today, I think there's no better space than thinking about it through critical science fiction. So let's just kind of begin and get into this conversation. So I don't know, you know her work hardest.
Could I just, before you start, say thank you everyone for being here. Thank you also to Columbia Global Center for inviting me, and Rishi Goyal, who is now best of friends with me forever, and all the people I met today. It's really been a revelation that there is such a thing as medical humanities, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity.
Great, thank you. I don't know if you all know, but she just isn't a phenomenal playwright and novelist, but is India's first woman cartoonist. Is that?
There is some contention about that. So I always say that there is Maya Kamath, who is, I would say, India's first political cartoonist. I think my age gives me a slight edge. It's possible that I'm the first published woman cartoonist, but I don't make a big deal about the first, because if I'm at 65, if I'm the first, when I began publishing in the 80s, it's not my credit. It's a sad thing that there weren't any before. So it's not really to my credit. I just happen to have got there.
So why don't you take us through maybe a little bit of your trajectory as an artist? Because as I said, you work in comics, you're a playwright, you're a novelist, you're a short story writer. So you're working in a number of different media. Is there an arc or a trajectory?
Yes. It's that when I went to boarding school, and one of my school friends is in the audience, and when I came out of boarding school at the end of '69, I was, for whatever reason, really determined that I should earn a living for myself so that I could leave home and live away from my parents. And in this, I was 16. And it seemed to me I had to look at what I could do. I could draw and I could write, and I felt, well, obviously I had to sell these things one way or the other. And I came to the decision that whereas I didn't mind selling drawings and art in a totally commercial manner, I had to keep writing for higher pursuits. So I did what I could to sell drawings. And it was then unusually difficult to just go to magazines and say, use me. And it was, so when people ask me why did I start making comic strips, it was just one of many different ways that I looked for to earn a living. I had to pay rent, I wasn't living at home, and I needed a regular source of income. It was a terrible source of income, but it did help to pay rent, at least 3/4 of the rent. and people imagine that authors just kind of sit in some beautiful study and produce floods of work. But no, at least for me, it was very much, it's not that I struggled to work, but I struggled to make a living, because I always had to make a living. And that's very different to just producing the work.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of, Virginia Woolf talking about having a room of one's own. And it's often couched in that term, that this isn't a dilettante activity. This is a practical, in-the-world activity that allows you to eat and live.
Pay rent.
Yeah, and pay rent. I mean, these are things that I think are...
People were always feeding me, but they weren't paying the rent.
Let's stick to your work on cartoons for a second, or comics. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you think that's different from your work in the theater or in novels. And I'm particularly interested, because you may or may not know, there is a field in the art world that's developing called graphic medicine. I don't know if any of you have ever looked at these, but there are remarkable long-form comics or graphic novels that are dealing with illness. So something like Stitches comes to mind, or Cancer Vixen, and they're really wonderful works. And maybe you could say why you might think that the comic medium can talk about illness.
I don't know why specifically illness, but what comics do that prose does not do it as easily is the whole issue of something visible, a drawing, is that it makes sense at once. You immediately understand, oh, there's a girl there, there's maybe a girl sitting on a hospital bed, and there's someone who looks like a doctor. All of that is explained in one frame, and you can move quickly through. So, and the other issue that I believe has been true for some years now is we are living in a world where communication is taking place across many cultures and many language groups. And I think, as we all know from tweets and the internet, we are all expressing ourselves in shorthand. And what is getting through is pictures. A smiling face is immediately recognized as a smiling face and is now used to say, you're good, I'm good, we're all good, we're healthy. There is a visual medium, a visual language of communication, and comics achieve that. You can quite often understand a comic without really being able to read it. Though, of course, reading, as I was saying, exchanging with someone else, comics are very much more a literary medium than the consumer realizes. As someone who creates comics, I know that the text component, what I put into it, is what it's not that I write the text first, but I must have an idea which will translate into a pattern of words. And at least for my strips, you can't understand the strip without the little bit of text in it. And I would say writing a comic strip really trained my ability to write dialogue. Because I remember this so clearly in the first strips that I created for the newspaper I was working with. There was a lot of text. The two little characters who were in the strips, they said a great deal. It was actually very difficult to read. I was writing in very tiny script. And I realized that at some point where I had one character giving a rose to another character in a picture, and I had one character say, "I am giving you a rose," and then I stopped and realized I can see that. So I can save myself the effort of saying, "I give you a rose," which I would do in prose. In prose, I'd have to say, "I'm giving you something."
So there's a kind of economy that
yes,
comes
and
in.
that is at the heart of theater. We can see what they're doing on stage, so we don't have to say, "I'm walking across the room."
Yeah.
I am. They have. In the direction I say, A walks across the room, and we can be talking all along. And
then they're also really funny too. I feel like your comics, while they deal with very serious, often topics, or social topics. You can say more about that, but they're often very funny.
Well, the audience in Bombay certainly reacted very violently against, and I got lots of aggressive. It became a running joke. How many people would write to say they hated the strip and please stop it, I'm going to end my subscription because I hate that strip so much. And it became one of those, one of the issues, what are they reacting to? It was very mild, it was not political. So I don't know about funny. But one of the things I had learned a long time ago, and this is not just in writing or as a working person, as someone I grew up outside India, and when I returned to India as a teenager, I found it quite difficult to fit in. And I lived in a hostel for a short while. I lived in a hostel in Bombay where the people around, the other girls were from very different backgrounds, and for them, I was very much a freak. I had a much stronger accent, and my entire life was very odd and very different from what they had experienced. And I briefly considered being a tragic heroine, and then realized, no, that's a bore, and came to the conclusion that if I could make fun of myself, because if you make fun of other people, they can object, but if you make fun of yourself, people are very happy to laugh at you. And it was a tactic. It was a method of getting others to let down their guard, and also to find the particular element that will make somebody else laugh. And you can search for it, like poking people with pins, and is this going to, this is a tickle spot,
Yeah. Well, it's not unlike Lear's Fool, right?
Yes.
The fool, the clown, you can be transgressive, but somewhat masked, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I often say, because I write, my plays are usually, or so far have been on harsh issues, but they have points of laughter. And I find where it becomes really useful is, okay, your subject is dark and everyone is a bit tense, and you throw in something that is almost a joke, and people relax and actually physically open their mouths, and in that moment you toss something in.
That's a great metaphor, I love it. Well, let's use that to move into Harvest,
Okay.
which is a very funny play, right?
funny dark.
Funny dark. So, I mean, I came to Manjula's work through Harvest, and I know there's, I think, a class here that's actually reading Harvest, which is, fantastic. And that's my first introduction to why I wanted to talk to her in this context of medical humanities. For those of you who don't know the play, you should go out and buy it right now. But besides that, there you go, beautiful cover too. So it was first written in 1997. It was performed in Athens, I think, in 1999. And as Tulika mentioned, it won the Onassis Prize as, Best International Drama. Before I summarize it, were you surprised? Were you flabbergasted? Was that?
No, that's a really long story, and of course I was just blown away. But I sent it for a competition,
Yeah.
so I sent it in '96, and I spent an entire year waiting. So what can I say? It was an amazing shock, but it's not as if I didn't participate.
Right. Right, you expected, made it happen potentially.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, Harvest was set in, at that time, the near future, Bombay, as it was called, 2010. We open the play with a jobless man living in a small apartment named Om Prakash, who has just agreed to sell his organs via interplanta services. I love that, interplanta services, to a kind of, a potentially beautiful North American woman named Ginny, who we only see through a holographic contact module. The play then follows Om, Jaya, his wife, Jitu, Om's brother, and Mas. Those are the kind of main four characters. It's a very intimate play that deals with a kind of a big issue. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Harvest and thinking about, let's start with kind of, where were you when you came up with this? What were you thinking? What were you responding to?
Again, I've answered this question many times, so it's... but in 1995, there was a major news story that broke in Tamil Nadu about organ donors who were starting to come into the city complaining that some of them were dying because of the activities of organ touts who were scouring the countryside looking for people poor and willing to sell their kidneys. And it so happened I went to Madras, and I was walking, I had gone on a morning walk with my late brother-in-law, whose son is in the audience here, and he pointed to some people who were sitting in the courtyard of what looked like an ordinary building. And he said, those people sitting there with face masks and wearing dressing gowns, they are recovering from kidney surgery, meaning they are people who have bought illegal kidneys. And it suddenly became, from just a news story about villagers who were suffering because of the trade, I was seeing those who had bought the kidneys. And it's an illegal trade. You can't, now hospitals are set up to permit legal kidney donations, but you can't just buy a kidney it's illegal to buy a kidney on the black market. But that's what I was seeing. And in that moment, a thought came to my head that here are people who have inside their bodies a body part from a person they wouldn't have in their homes for tea. And it was just a shocking thought that you're willing to grab a body part from someone, buy it, keep it in yourself, but you won't meet that person socially. And it created a thought, I have to say that I think all authors are constantly like sharks, hungry for ideas, they're circling. And this was in early '95, and late in '95, I saw an announcement for this Greek International Theatre Prize, and as I think I have already made clear, I have always had a problem with rent. So I was thinking that it would be really cool to win that prize, and there was a long time. The submission date was 96, and the theme for the competition was the challenges facing humanity in the next century, because this was 95. And the submission date was 96, and it said that the the results would be announced in 97. So that set things in motion. And part of the reason why I always mention this competition, and that it's not that I just wrote the play out of the blue. I wrote it with this idea that, yes, this is this trade in human organs. It's not just between people living on the same road as my parents' house. It's something that is going on across the world as well. And then if you step it up and think of textile workers or garments factories where people, very poor people, work for terrible wages so that the rich in other countries can buy their clothes very cheap. It's not organs, but it's time. They are selling their time for very little money. Because one of the things about the organ trade is that the donor gets, I don't know what the current rates are, but in those days, it was 20,000 rupees for a kidney. And for a poor farmer who earned less than, I don't know what, 500 rupees in a year, 20,000 rupees was a huge treasure. But this is what the news story said. In less than a year, that farmer had remarried, had, funded all kinds of banquets, because he'd remarried, would have at least one more child. Then but in less than a year, that 20,000 rupees had been frittered away. And then he would be pressuring his wife to give up her kidney, the first wife, to give up her kidney. And in all of this, eventually, if you are already poor, you're already living without great health facilities, then to live without a kidney in places where there isn't much water, people were starting eventually to die. Not directly of the surgery, but of the trade. And that's when it came into the news cycle. So there's an evolution to all of this, to how the play got written. The way that writing it for the competition focused my mind on international connections, not just within one culture. And somehow the pathos of a small family being hugely augmented by this infusion in the play. It's not just money, because the buyer wants to ensure that the organs that of course there is a lie involved in the play. The buyer tells the family that she wants to keep them in good health, all of them, because if she's going to get organs from one, then that person must not be infected by anyone else. So then everyone who lives in the unit, they can't go out of the unit. They have to drink and eat the water and food that she provides in order to guarantee a certain physical competence. So, it all began to, it fell together in a certain way as an idea.
Yeah, and do you, just for a moment, just to focus on that town and that moment, there's at least one anthropologist named Nancy Shepard Hughes who writes about the organ trade a little bit. And one question that comes up is, to what degree is a person making an informed choice when they when they sell their kidney? And is this really a choice? Because it comes up in the play a little bit too. To what degree is Om making a subjective choice as a subject position? Or is this a purely exploitative relationship?
Well, what of course Om says at some point, is it really my choice?
Yeah.
Because we were starving and an opportunity arrived and I found this way. But I can switch to a slightly different perspective and talk about an anecdote, an incident after Harvest had been published, and people were wanting to facilitate me.
Facilitate, yeah.
So I was at a kind of public gathering, and it was a group of very well-heeled women who wanted to felicitate me. And so we talked about the issue, organ transplant and so on. And in the midst of this meeting, one lady, and I championed her for getting up and saying, she was an older woman, who said in a sort of cheery voice, this was in Madras, she said, this is all very well, but you know and we know when one of us needs a kidney, and if we don't have a relative from whom we can get it, we are going to buy it. And we are not going to be fretting about the morality of it at that point. So her point was, let's not be dewy-eyed about this. Let's not be compassionate. And I listened to her and I thanked her for her response. I didn't argue with her, but this is the issue. There is a choice. And if I need a kidney and I don't have a family member, and if I am close to death, then I will die. And I will accept that rather than grab somebody's kidney against his or her will. There is also that. We have the choice to be compassionate and accepting of mortality.
So, I mean, mortality, the idea of not accepting mortality also runs through this book. I mean,
yes.
I think what's amazing is how many, for me, medico-scientific / techno-imaginary ideas are running here at the same time. It's not just about the organ trade, but it's about coming to terms with the inevitability or the vulnerability of bodies. And that figures very importantly for you too.
Well, the sense I have is that most people in the first place avoid thinking about death altogether. And lightheartedly we talk about immortality and and so on. But as we grow older, the reality of it, and of course relatives, parents, friends are dying. And the sense that, well, it could actually happen to me someday is disquieting, because we are not taught to think about death. We don't discuss it as a friendly thing. We discuss it as a horror. I mean, I'm always amazed on Facebook when people sympathize with someone who has died, someone who has lost someone, okay? And the way they talk about, I was so shocked. And it's like, why are you shocked when your 90-year-old parent has died in his or her sleep? I mean, you can be shocked that, or saddened by their passage, and if they've had an accident, that's a shock. But that you die is not, why is that shocking? And it seems to me we don't talk about it. And even when we do, there's a kind of hope that, well, we can talk about it, but it's actually not going to happen to any of us right now. But it could. And I'm not ever suggesting that one is light-hearted about it. And I'm not saying that I have any formula. But I do think this issue of compassion, and if for instance, person who was looking to receive a kidney was told, well, we just have to kill someone to get the kidney, they would say no. But if we say we will do a very compassionate and caring operation to get the kidney out, and the person will die in 10 years, or in 3 years, or something like that, well, then you think, oh, well, then that's okay. Or I don't even think about it, because we don't say that. We say we'll pay for it, and then we'll get a kidney, and it's all going to be okay, and they'll be happy, and you'll be happy, and then everyone is fine. But the issue of one's own mortality is something that we try to put off. And maybe it would be better if we didn't fear the passage to the extent that we all, I'm not saying that I don't have fear. It's just that maybe I think about it a little more than many. I don't know.
You think it's something that people don't think about?
I think we are all encouraged to avoid thinking about it.
That's right.
And it's also, I think, authors, creative people are people who are working with ideas all the time. So whereas in one's ordinary life, one goes about one's business to keep things growing, but as an author, one can follow a character into their depth, and you can imagine it, you can think about it, you can play with it, and maybe that's why authors are perhaps a little less afraid, because we're dealing with it.
So it's funny, because one of the things I want to think about a little bit in this work and all of your works is boundaries. And life and death obviously strikes me as, you know, they kind of our final boundary, but perhaps not. But there's quite a bit of boundary crossing in your work. You know, in this play, there's gender boundary crossing, there's relationship crossing, right? Om and Jitu change places. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what boundary crossing or border crossing does for you?
As we were saying earlier, it's possible that growing up in different countries gave me a very strong sense of the plasticity of personality, how the way that I grew up, we spent 3 years in different places. So, and I remember a particular moment when we had left one place, and I was 5 years old and very nervous that I wouldn't have friends in the next place. And I can remember this conversation where I said in the car leaving the place, but Sarah and Kitsi will not be there where we're going. And they said no. And I said, but you know, will I have friends? And they said, of course you will have friends. And Sarah and Kitsi were the meaning of the word friend. I hadn't yet learned that, you know, many people can. And I said, oh, so they are going to be there. And whoever I was speaking to said, of course not. You'll have other friends. And this realization that it's plastic. You can move this definition and move from here to here, and there will be other people, and you can also be anyone in that new place. You don't have to be the same person you were in the last place. You can be anyone. And that it just became, because I then realized that we were going to be doing this every so often, every few years we would shift, and it would mean a new identity possibly in each new place, and all the errors I made in the last place would perhaps not be repeated in the new place. And the sense of constant change, you know, was something enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, the plasticity gave you a sense of freedom a little bit.
Yes, it's like traveling, but traveling through other personalities.
Which I think brings up the notion of sort of science fiction, just for a brief moment. You know, when I first spoke to Manjula on the phone, I was a little hesitant to use the term science fiction. It's a pejorative, in the academy and these sort of university settings. Science fiction is kind of outre. It's I don't know. It's something that people like, so you can't spend too much time thinking about it. It's entertainment, right? And I sort of use the word speculative fiction. But Manjula completely adopted science fiction, and I was relieved actually. I don't know. I felt okay. I can get on board this. So tell me what science fiction means to you, or how you use it.
Yes, so I remember being about 12 years old when I read my first science fiction novel, which was called Have Spacesuit Will Travel by Robert Heinlein. And it was a very clever story in which there were sets of identical twins who had been, it was discovered that identical twins could be trained to augment their telepathic abilities. They could be trained to do that. And then, therefore, if one stayed on Earth and the other traveled in spacecraft, then they could maintain a connection which didn't suffer from radio frequencies because it was telepathy. And it was, it just took my mind to a new dimension. And also, at the same time, in the same age, I was watching TV shows where, as members of a space mission, meeting it was actually Star Trek many years later. It wasn't actually in the same era, but the sense that off the Earth and in the company of extraterrestrials, then the freakishness of my persona, where I was not recognized as Indian as my friends because I spoke with an accent or I didn't wear the kind of clothes that people believed were Indian enough or whatever it was. I wouldn't suffer from that because I was now amongst people who were green-skinned or had horns or whatever. So I didn't have to fret about that because humans would then just be humans, and then there would be these others on board the spaceship. So the sense that science fiction was a wonderful location for otherness. And I was very self-conscious in my teen years, not now, of course, of being different and of being other. So science fiction offered a relief from that.
Yeah. Well, and for me, so I teach Manjula's play also, and I teach it in the context of other science fiction writers. I wanted to read a quote by Ursula Le Guin, who you may or may not have read, but when she accepted the 2014 National Book Award, she said, "I think hard times are coming when we will be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now." In addition to Ursula Le Guin, another person I teach alongside Manjula's work is Octavia Butler. She's an African-American science fiction writer who's been described as visionary, by which is meant fantastical literature that helps us to understand existing power dynamics and helps us to imagine paths to create more just futures. Now, what I was going to ask Manjula is, can you speculate about why women and women of color are writing science fiction? And, I'd offered some of these questions in advance to her, and she said, I don't think of myself as a woman of color or as a woman. So I want to maybe hear more about that, because I thought it was a great reply.
It's easier to go back a few steps and say that I have become aware as a published person that the publishing world likes to have its divisions. It likes to divide the world. It doesn't say male writers, but there are women writers. There are writers and then there are women writers. From this we understand that writers is male. And and for whatever reason, I can't say that there's any doctrinaire reason. It's also possible that I'm a BA in economics and an MA in history. I didn't study literature, so I never consciously had to make some kind of distinction or to tell myself, I am now a woman writer. I did just, it was necessary. And I can say that it has been difficult not to belong or to avoid platforms, because the platforms are very useful. And I can't help but see that it's been much more helpful for those of my friends who have gladly accepted being women of color or Asian women writers unions and so on. It's not that, obviously it's not that I think I'm, I sort of spend my life being not this, but it's a bit, for me, it's a little bit like wearing a disguise to say, I am a woman of color. But, the world is mostly colored. And so to speak of myself as if I were a minority when I'm not, I know that there's a reason for it. The reason is the publishing world thinks like that, and because when we say the publishing world, we don't mean publishers, we mean wealthy publishers in the West. And so then for them, yes, there are categories. There are writers, who of course are men, and then there are women writers, and then there are women writers of color, and then women writers of color who are oppressed, and so on. And if I'm not oppressed, and I don't think of myself as being of color, and if I think of myself as a writer and not particularly a woman writer, then I'm in trouble in terms of what the publishing world sees or in fact doesn't see. It becomes difficult to see me. And one of the reasons that it really matters is that it's not just the publishers, it's also the readers. Readers tend to be introduced to writers as this person is from the Caribbean and she or he has this kind of history and background. And because there are these categories, if you don't, as in fact I don't, easily fit or accept the category that I should fit under, then it's hard for me to be tagged. I won't belong in anthologies, I won't be easily included. It may seem like, oh, this is this hard life that I live, but I avoid, one of the many terms that I avoid is I refuse to be a victim. So I just don't feel it. I just refuse to feel it.
Yeah. And how do you feel about the term medical humanities, or putting your work in that context?
So when you mentioned that, and you said, you referred to my play as a medical play, I'm not sure what particular term you used. As journalists had, as I said, sometimes asked me, how did I train to write this play? What research did I do? And I was at pains to say, it's not medical. It's not, you're not going to learn surgery from reading my play. Because it refers to a medical intervention, but I don't see it as medical. So when you brought that up, I was quite amused. I spent all my life, not all my life, but since Harvest, I've spent, assuring people that this is not, you're not going to have to, understand or learn all kinds of rare terms in order to understand the play. It's about ordinary people who are getting stuff taken out of their bodies. And you're not going to be faced with a barrage of weird terms. So since speaking to you and during today's discussions, I have come to realize that yes, Harvest is actually about a medical procedure, but I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you then a question that you brought up, and I think I like this a lot, because this is actually our time is going quicker than I expected, but assumed it still would. So in an email conversation you wrote to me, the great irony is that even though everyone associates the play with the organ trade, the heart of it is about surrogacy. And just to give you a little context for those of you who haven't read it, in the play we learn that Ginny is actually a man named Virgil, so another kind of border crossing there, another gender crossing, who says to Jaya, "We're interested in women where I live, Zaya, childbearing women, because we lost the art of having children." So can you talk about how you see the relationship between the organ trade and surrogacy? We were talking about flows earlier, and I think that fits. Or even maybe just why this is really a play about surrogacy and not the organ trade.
Because when I was writing the play and the issue of organ transplants and so on, it seemed to me, it's not as if a kidney is the kind of organ that you feel really powerful about. There's no great emotional charge. but I shifted my mind to the fact that this is a fully legal trade in renting wombs, renting the use of a uterus. And that is also an extraordinary thing, because if a woman sells her sexual services, that's looked down upon. But if a woman rents her womb for the use of a wealthy couple who want a baby, that's fine. And has full social sanction. There's clinics that deal with it. So at the time I wrote Harvest, it was not as set up as it is now. But it seemed to me kidneys are one and the uterus is another organ. And it's an organ which is very much more intimate in its functions. And if I sneakily shift the base from kidneys to uterus in the middle of the play, and you don't really know it because the supposed recipient of Ohm's body parts is actually a man and he's actually interested in Ohm's wife, then the entire emotional center of the play shifts from man to woman. And the way that societies regard the use of a woman makes of her body, again, is something that societies across culture are very interested in and usually very critical, especially when it comes to sale. So, all of these are little, I was using little strings to pull. Because keep in mind, I was also writing a play, and a play it's not a piece of prose that the reader engages with just one-on-one, the reader alone with the page. A play is written for performance in a group setting, where a large number of people are all pulled together through the trajectory of what's happening on stage. And that, it seems to me, plays allow an author to pluck directly at the strings in the audience. And the audience doesn't really know that that's what's happening. The audience goes to be entertained, but actually the playwright is using the audience as puppets. The puppets are not on stage, the puppets are in the audience, being pulled by an absent playwright. And it is a very manipulative act to write a play, because everything you write, the way you use words, the way you elicit emotions through the use of particular words, is very conscious. And in writing Harvest, because of the way that I was structuring the play as something that I wanted a play that would make sense across time, not just for the one performance or the one location. I was writing it for an international competition, and for that reason, I wanted themes that would make sense across cultures. And the one thing that, there are certain themes that all cultures respond to, and amongst them are tensions within a family, and particularly tensions between two brothers and a wife. There are two brothers, there's one wife, and there's a mother-in-law. And this is a recipe for a lot of emotional drama in any culture. So I was playing with a palette of emotions that I think I would find anywhere.
That's fantastic. That's a great point maybe to move into our reading. So what we'd like to do is just read a short segment early on. We're going to be reading from Act 1, Scene 2. This is
full source of
Interplanta Services. OM has agreed to sell his organs. Interplanta Services has replaced their kitchen with a new kind of fangled kitchen, and the family is sort of coming to terms with this fact. I'll read OM, and I will also read the stage directions. Okay, and Manjula will read.
I'll read Ma, and I'll read Jaya. And so long as I remember, whoever's part I'm reading, I'll say Ma, I'll say Jaya.
Okay, great. So, Act 1, Scene 2. The same room. Om and Ma are sitting upstage center. A mat is spread on the floor, and they are eating the colored pellets of their new food. Jaya is leaning her head and shoulders against the side of the bed. The package is opened, its contents are strewn about. There are brightly colored instruction leaflets, elaborately devised containers for pills and powders, and a number of small gadgets, similar in size and shape to a slide viewing device, but of obscure purpose.
Ma, tell me again, all you have to do is sit at home and stay healthy?
Not sit, necessarily.
And they'll pay you?
Yes.
Even if you do nothing but pick your nose all day?
They'll pay me.
What about off days?
Well, every day is off, in one sense.
Jaya, why don't you tell her the truth? Ma, isn't this the truth?
Jaya.
Jaya, tell her. Tell your mother what you've really done. Ma, shoo, don't speak to your husband in that voice.
The walls are thin. Everyone can hear when you talk like this.
Jaya, everyone knows already. Do you think you're the only one with this job? Do you think people don't know what it means when the guards come from the agency? All that remains to be known is which part of you is being given away. Ma, what's this? Who's giving away parts of whom?
She's just trying to make trouble.
Jaya, Ma, who cares about her? Wife or sister, mother comes first. So tell me, these people, your employers, who exactly are they?
Actually it's just one person.
Ma, just one person? With so much money to give away? Jaya, it's a foreigner. That's why it's so much. Ma, what?
The money comes from abroad.
Ma, really? But doesn't that mean you'll have to go there, abroad?
Ma, no one goes abroad these days.
Jaya, not whole people anyway.
I'm warning you now, Jaya.
Ma, what's that? What do you mean? Jaya, not his whole body, just parts of it. Ma, what's your wife saying?
Why are you doing this? Why are you making trouble?
Jaya, you said it wouldn't affect us, but see what it's done already.
So tell me, what? In exchange for your old kitchen, you have a new modern one.
Jaya, you call this food? This goat shit? Ma, it's better than what you make. Jaya, and calling me your sister, what's that? If I'm your sister, what does that make you? Sister. My forehead burns when I say that word, sister. Ma, shoo, are you a street woman to speak in such a voice?
You think I did it lightly? But at the cost of calling you my sister, we'll be rich. Very rich, insanely rich. But you'd rather live in this one small room, I suppose. Think it's such a fine thing, living day in, day out, like monkeys in a hothouse, a hot case, lulled to sleep by our neighbor's rhythmic farting, dancing to the tune of the melodious traffic, and starving. Yes, You prefer this to being called my sister on a stupid slip of paper no one we know will ever see.
Ma, why fight over what is finished? Tell me about this rich foreigner, your employer. Who is he? Why does he love you so much? That's what I don't understand. Where did he meet you? Jaya, oh, just tell her, tell her.
We've never met, Ma.
Ma, what?
He's rich and old. That's all I know about him. Probably suffering from some illness.
Then why is he paying you so much? Jaya, oh, Ma, don't you see? Isn't it obvious? Ma, to Jaya, you're so smart that you can hear God himself thinking, but I need to hear with my ears. Tell me, my son.
Oh, you wouldn't understand, Ma.
Jaya, I'll tell you. He's sold the rights to his organs, his skin, his eyes, his arse. He's sold them. Oh, God. God, what's the meaning of this nightmare? How can I hold your hand, touch your face, knowing that at a moment it might be snatched away from me and flung across the globe? If you were dead, I could shave my head and break my bangles, but this? To be a widow by slow degrees? To mourn you piece by piece? Should I shave half my head? Break my bangles one at a time? Ma, how is it possible?
If you weren't so busy feeling sorry for yourself, you'd have read what they say about respecting the donor.
Of course, they bathe him in praise while gutting him like a chicken. Ma, but why must they come to us?
See? Look. In this paper it says that 1/3 of all donors are left absolutely intact.
Ma, don't they have enough people of their own? Ma, Jaya, and where does that leave you? 2/3 a man, half a wit?
They don't have people to spare.
Jaya, and we do, of course. We grow on trees, in the bushes. Ma, well, so long as they don't hurt you.